Okay, so in this section, we're going to talk about the validation process, meaning how do we get our validation elements in place? We have our network configured, we have our growth rates configured. What we need to do now is just validate it. So we need to get our observed ridership in and make sure that it matches up with our routes and then run the validation process. So we'll go over all of those as part of this section. So in terms of the high-level validation process, like I said, we've already configured the base year network. We've run the TBEST model where it's in the process of running. Our next step is to group network route patterns into collections, and so that we can aggregate the route patterns so that they match our observed ridership levels. So what that means is that what TBEST attempts to do here is say, generally what we do is the route level, and we can aggregate ridership to routes like an average weekday, average Saturday, average Sunday, input that into the validation and have that work. However, in some cases, you may have less data than that. You may not have ridership at the route level. So then you need to say, well, I don't have it at the route level, I have it at the system level. And I want to validate to the system one single number, let's say for weekday, Saturday, and Sunday, as opposed to at the route level. So it would allow you to do that relative to your routes, the data you have for a ridership, and make TBEST match up to that number. So the idea is that TBEST can be flexible in order to match your observed ridership data. Now, this used to be a little bit of a problem in the past where not everyone had, route level ridership data, but most folks have it at this point, and that it's not so much of an issue. All right, so step 5 is to run the TBEST model validation procedure to calculate route level ridership adjustment factors. So there is an actual procedure that runs that does the validation, and when it validates, it actually creates adjustment factors that are applied whenever you run the model in the future. So that is basically a fitting mechanism to say, well, here's what TBEST predicted, raw, just using the model structure as it is, that came from Tampa, we mentioned that before. And but my travel demand is a little bit different. And so what the model validation will do is take into consideration your travel demand locally that you've input through the observed ridership and create those adjustment factors that fit TBEST model runs output to your observed conditions. Okay. So there is a validation menu. If you right click on the June 2021, you can get to validation where you see the options for route collections, collection observed ridership, and run model validation. So these are the 3 steps that we'll need to complete here to finish the validation on this transit system. So the first step is to set the route collections. And this is the dialogue that comes up whenever you do that. And essentially what you're doing is you have a list of routes over here on the left. These are your route collections that you can add or delete. And what we do is we fill each collection. This says routes in collections. So you have route 128, and there's a pattern here northbound that's already in the collection. And this is the available routes. And what this is a list of routes that are not in a collection. So they're available for you to place into a collection. So route 128 southbound would need to be, you would click on this button and it would push it into that. So all of the patterns that are available for route 128 would be put into this grouping so that whenever TBEST estimated ridership, it would estimate for all the patterns for 128. And because we have observed ridership for 128, then those two match, right? So we're doing a matching mechanism here to make sure that we're matching observed ridership levels that we have in terms of detail and to what TBEST will do to aggregate its ridership to match that. So this is a matching process. And so, and in general, it's not that hard because whenever you bring in a GTFS, it will automatically create route collections that are based on the routes that you have. And then and actually place all the routes into collections. So this process is a lot of times will be done for you automatically by TBEST. It's not something where you have to do a lot of this manually. So just so you know that as well. So once you have formulated your collections, then it's time to input the ridership, the observed ridership into them. So this is the form for doing that, where you have the route collection here, the average weekday observed ridership, the average Saturday and average Sunday on a per route basis that you can enter directly into this form, or you can use Excel and formulate the values in Excel and do a direct copy paste into TBEST from Excel, which is what we'll do as part of the exercise. You'll also see that there's a load from GTFS import ridership. So if you've imported your APC data from using the GTFS, then you can click this button. Because it's at the stop level, at the route pattern stop level inside of the stop ridership.txt used for TBEST, then you can actually fill this in completely just by clicking this button, because you already have the stop level ridership data that you can aggregate up to whatever TBEST collections you have. So that's kind of an added bonus of getting the APC ridership data in here, is that you just click this button, it will update and populate all of these collection level aggregations of your stop level data. So what is the result of a TBEST model validation? So TBEST calculates the route level ridership adjustment factors to be applied during model application. Yep, we talked about that. Adjustment factors are specific to the scenario, fare structure, service levels, socioeconomic data, and model specifications. That's right. So everything was an input to it, and then it calculated, the final calculation is essentially the factors. Updates the base socioeconomic data based on the span in years between the source data and the forecast year in the base scenario, and the socioeconomic growth rate. So it actually changes the base data as opposed to just applying growth rates interactively. It actually makes the change to it. It locks the model definition files for the transit system. So all scenarios will have the locked model definition applied during model runs. So this is to protect the model itself, meaning that you would, once you validate your system, you could potentially go in and change that model structure. Remember, we were looking at the TBEST Land Use Model 2018 model structure, looking at all the parameters for it. You can make a change to it. And then if you ran the model against that, or your validated model, essentially they're out of sync. You've changed it. So it no longer applies. But what we do during validation is we make a copy of that model structure that you used for the validation and place it in a folder that is referenced by TBEST, just specifically for that transit system, so that it doesn't change. It locks it into place so that you can't mess that up. Okay, so it's a little bit of a protection device for your model and your output. So the validation input scenario will become the transit system base scenario and will be accessible in read-only context. That also is another protective element. So once you have validated your base scenario that you use for the validation, in our case, it's the June 2021, it will become read-only. And so that what that means is that it protects it from you editing it, which, going back several versions in TBEST, it wasn't locked. And you would always hear someone, oh, I edited the base year. Okay, well, that kind of throws things off. So the locking of it makes sure that whenever you go to compare that base year output with another application scenario, because you can't edit it, it will always be true to the validation. Okay, so after validation, this is what your TBEST Explorer will look like. We've kind of seen this with the validation, the base year scenarios, read-only, and then you have application edit scenarios. So this is where we want to get to for a TDP kind of application. All right, and these are another report that you can get to post-validation is the actual adjustment factors that TBEST calculated. So so these are the individual route level factors by weekday, Saturday, and Sunday, where a 1 is a perfect match between the TBEST estimated ridership and the observed ridership. So what this is doing is, this is what is applied. Whenever you run a model in TBEST, it will apply this factor to the ridership estimation so that it fits it to the observed ridership in the base. Now, it will still take into consideration all of the changes that you would make in the network. So in an application scenario, you may change lots of the factors, the service, the socioeconomic, et cetera, and it will take all that in consideration, but it will still apply this adjustment factor so that it would still be in context of where it was in the base year. Another report that you can get to in a post validation, and this is a model after a model run on a particular scenario, that will tell you what factors were applied to what routes. And for the most part, that would be a one-to-one correlation between the route collection and the route name, right? But in the instance where you're adding new routes, then you need to make sure that it's being applied in an aggregate way so that whenever you have a new route, it takes an average adjustment factor based on the route type and mode of all of the other routes in the system that match the new route. So, so in this case, all of those that are new are in this orange color. And so you can see this is route 14 was a new route in this application. And it had an average adjustment factor of 0.64 in the weekday, 0.84, 0.62, so that you can actually see that, right? So you can see what TBEST is doing under the hood when it's running the model, and then you can see some of this output, so you can see why did it, estimate what it did. And so this is a big part of why it would estimate in a certain way. So you can look at this and see. Okay, so you may ultimately, not today, not tomorrow, but down the road, have to remove a validation. And certainly that's something that TBEST can do. And you would only do it in certain situations. Clearly, if you had brand new socioeconomic data you want to put in, that's a cause for revalidation. If your network is changing dramatically and you have observed ridership, and you want to make sure you're validated to the new network, that's a cause for revalidation. So there's a listing here of reasons that you might want to do that. And there are procedures in the user guide that would help you perform that. Okay. Any questions on that? So what we are going to do is actually do our validation here. So 4.0 base year validation, exercise step 1, entering routes into validation collections. So the first step is in TBEST Explorer, right click on the June 2021 scenario and select validation route collections menu option. So I'm right clicking validation and the route collections menu option. Okay. In the validation route collections dialog, the route collections should be pre-populated for each route imported from the GTFS. So you can see that route 1 already has route 1 westbound pattern and the eastbound pattern are already in this collection. If we switch to 2, it will switch this list to 3, 5, etc. Right? So all of these are filled properly, which is what we want. What we're missing here is this available routes. And for the validation, whenever you're validating, you have to have this list has to be empty. TBEST won't allow you to validate unless all of your route patterns are in collections. So we need to make sure we've filled this 150 into the proper route collection, which I think we need to create a route 150 collection. Yes. So what we're going to do is in our new collection name dialog, we're going to type route 150 and just hit add. So what that will do is add into our list, our route 150 is now right here and it is empty. There are no routes in this collection, but what we want to do is shift click and select both of these route patterns and click the arrow and place those route 50 route patterns into this collection. So again, we're just doing a matching so that the TBEST ridership will match the observed ridership, TBEST estimated ridership. So we've kind of fulfilled what we needed to do, which was move all of the route patterns out of this particular, the list of available routes, and into a collection. And so we should be good to go. We have all of them filled. If we want to kind of click through and just check and see, that's certainly a good practice, is to make sure all of them are filled and they have patterns in them. If there are route collections that are empty, there's no patterns to fill into them, and there's none in the available routes, then you can delete them. So you don't need them anymore because that route may have been deleted, etc. You don't know for sure, but you can remove it. So I would suggest that you go through and inspect each one of these to see if there are route patterns in it. If there are no route patterns and there are no available routes, or there's, that route has been deleted, then you can just delete it from this list. Okay. So that's it. So we hit close. Okay. So I'm on to step 2, enter route validation collection ridership. So in TBEST Explorer, right click on the 2020 June 21 scenario and select the validation step 2 collection observed ridership menu option. So again, we right click validation and the second step collection observed ridership, which is empty. Okay, so we have not entered any ridership in at this point, but what you do see is all of our route collections are in this list. Here is our route 50 that we just added, is also in this list. And what we want to do is populate this table with observed ridership. All right. Okay, I'm on step 3. To access, well, okay, before I go to step 3, I will tell you too that you can just edit here. So you can enter a number here, and whatever your actual ridership is, you can enter it directly into this table, right? We're going to do it another way because it's faster, and it's also a great way to do some aggregation outside of TBEST and then bring it directly in. So if I'm doing this for the first time, I have an empty table like this. My first step would be to export this to Excel so that I have this exact table in Excel format, and I can work with it inside of Excel rather than directly here in TBEST. So I would do that. I would, create a observed ridership and just export it out. And it will open in Excel and it'll look just like this. Now, what I would do is just start populating these values in Excel because I can work with them much better in this environment than I can in this, this table. So, so that's my normal process for doing this type of work. But for right now, we're going to close this Excel, and that was more of a off script. So just bear that in mind. If you did that, you can close it, and we'll resume step 3 or item 3 here. To access the Gatorville ridership, open Windows File Explorer and navigate to the TBEST Transit Systems Gatorville Data Validation folder. All right, I can do that. So we go again to our Windows Explorer, and we're in our TBEST Transit Systems Gatorville Data folder. And if we go to Validation, we have a June 2021 Gatorville ridership data.csv. So I can open that up directly in Excel. Hopefully you all can too. And what this is essentially what we had, our collections that we exported from TBEST, and we've just filled in the ridership data here so that we can match it. And remember, this is average daily observed for weekday, Saturday, and Sunday, average daily observed. So our next step is step 4 is to copy the spreadsheet ridership values to TBEST. So from the spreadsheet, select cell range B2 to D53. So we're going to start here at B2. We're going to click and hold and drag down to D53. That's the range to select, which is all of the ridership data. And we're going to select Control C from the keyboard, and that will copy this range to the clipboard. And we're going to come back over into TBEST, and we're going to go into the first cell, Route 1 weekday. Just click on that cell. and then use your Control V to paste the ridership data into the table. Okay, so this is the observed ridership that comes from RTS/Gatorville in Gainesville. So yeah, so this is what we wanted to have populated for our validation. All right. Okay, so I'm on exercise step 2 continued. So enter route validation collection observed ridership, and this is an optional step. Yeah, so if you wanted to, because we have the APC observed ridership data, then you could load it from stop ridership. Click this button, load from stop ridership. Now, what I would say is before I do that, I'm going to click OK here, and that will save it. And then I can reopen it and go to validation collection observed ridership. And then I'm going to load from stop ridership. So this will completely change those numbers based on the observed ridership that came in from the APC data. So there are a couple methods to fill out this table. One is if you have the APC data and at the stop level that came in from the GTFS, all you have to do is click this button and it will fully populate the table. If you don't have that, then you have to aggregate it at the route level kind of on your own and paste it in. So those are the two methods to populate this table. So I'm going to close this, and so that will be my validation, right? So let me go back to it, make sure. Yeah, okay, so it didn't, it's the original numbers. Okay, so everyone get through that step. Hopefully, Brian, you were through that step.
I am. I'm with you.
Okay, excellent. So let's go to our next step, step 3, where we're going to run the model validation procedure. Okay, so step 1 is before running the model validation procedure, create a distribution file or .tds file of your transit system. So that would ask you to close any open scenarios. And then in TBEST Explorer, right-click on the Gatorville transit system. And I'm also going to make sure I don't have any data open. So if I have any data open, like I have this spreadsheet open, that was our Gatorville ridership. I actually want to close that because that's actually wrapped up in this in this data that's going to zip up. So I don't want it to have any problems on the zip, because if something is already open, then it will have problems zipping it. So I'm going to close that. I don't want to save it. And so that's fine. And I think there are no other files that are within this folder structure that I need or that are already open. So I'm clear to do an export. So if I right click on export to TBEST distribution file, it will just ask me for the name. And we want to say Gatorville pre-validation as the name. And automatically, well, actually, let's go to TBEST and distributable systems. So this is the location that we want to place it in, C TBEST distributable systems, and we'll call it Gatorville pre-validation. Okay, so once you have this, you hit save, and it will export your data into all the Gatorville system into a single file, which is your basically your backup of your data, right? So you can then bring that data back in by importing it. So this is your loaded transit system from a distribution file. So we could just load this back in whenever we want to kind of pull that transit system back in. So it's a way to put a transit system into a single file that you can use and transfer around. If I want to give this file to Matt, I can just put this on Google Drive or whatever and give it to him, and he can import that transit system into his TBEST. Okay, but we do that prior to validation so that we can come back to it. So if there's any problem with the validation, like we need to, oh, we forgot to add special generators, let's go back and do that. So it'll allow you to then just go back to that particular transit system and start from where you left off and just keep going and editing rather than removing the validation and going through that process. You can go directly right to where you left off prior to validation. So it's a kind of a shortcut to get to the where you would want to be in case there's ever a problem with your validation. Okay, so we're ready to run the validation. So let's right click again on June 2021 and go to validation and run model validation, step 3. And I'll do that again because I went through that pretty quick. So June 2021, validation, item 3, run model validation. Says it is recommended that you make a distribution file of this transit system prior to validation. Do you want to continue? Yes, I do. And then just telling you what it's going to do as a reminder, and we'll just say okay. And we'll let that run.
Rodney, a great question from Brian. He says, I assume that there are other junctions where saving our work as a distribution file makes sense.
Yes, lots of reasons to do that. Anytime that you want to make a backup of your work, certainly I would do that. I don't know about daily, but it depends on how much work you're doing, but you always want to have a copy of it around. That would be your full set of work and your system. And so, backups, if you have, like say you've finished a project and you've developed many scenarios in that project, and you want that in its total to be backed up as a transit system, so you can always say, and give that transit system to someone and say, hey, I created 10 scenarios. Here are all the scenarios that I ran. And you have all of that you can give to someone else, or you can pull it back in whenever you need to. And then maybe you start over, remove all the scenarios in your production environment, and then start back over with a clean slate. So it can be a backup for a project that would have lots of different work that you might put into it that you might want to not keep in production, but have as a backup. Okay, so the transit system model validation is complete. So I have that, and hopefully everyone does too. And we just say, okay. And now that we have that, we're at the point.
Can I interject a question?
Sure. Oh, of course.
Yeah, it's not letting me validate because it's saying that my routes are not in collections.
Okay.
I think I was still waiting for the previous.
Mine is the same, Brian. I'm having the same problem.
Okay, are you and you've already gone to the collection and added the Route 150 and put the Route 150 patterns into the collection?
No, I think when you were doing that, I was still waiting for my network to
Okay, that's
run.
yeah, that's fine. We can back up and do that. But since it's validated, now is the point where I'd be like, oh, okay, now I need to go back to my validated state because actually my menu options change after validation. So,
Rodney, why don't you just import the exported or pre-validated TBS that you just made?
yeah, I can do that too. So when I import it in, it's going to be called Gatorville 1 because you can't have two that are the same name. And so if you go to June 2021 and go to validation and go to route collections, and you should see 150 in this list.
Yeah.
Okay. So you'll need to type in Route 150 in as a new name. Just type in Route 150 and hit add. And that will appear in your list. So I already have Route 150. but you want to select it right here and then select the available routes and push those over into that collection. So you should have them in this list of available routes, and then you would just push them over using this arrow button.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, you'll have no available routes and you should be able to validate. But what I would say is you probably have to, if I close this, you probably now have to go and do the observed ridership. Have you done this step where you have observed ridership?
Yeah.
Okay. So you may or may not, based on the fact that you just added the Route 150, they may be, anything after Route 150 may be a little bit not quite right because the sequencing is off because you added Route 150. So you may need to go back in. I mean, you don't have to. This is all just, training, so it doesn't matter that much. But in practice, you would need to go in and recopy the ridership data back into this so that it all matches up because you didn't have 150 there when you did it before. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And Brian or Susan or anyone that's left kind of in that place, I can help you in the breakout room if you're still having problems.
No, good go. Thank you.
Okay. And then
I had a feeling that's what it was, but I didn't know how to do that because I wasn't able to follow along with you the first go round.
okay. Yeah, sorry about that. So you'll still will have to do the validation. So once you have that set, you can just do the run model validation and then you'll be up to where we're at. Okay. So we are at 5. Okay, so we're at exercise step 3 and we're at item 5. To view the validation adjustment factors, right click on June 2021 scenario and select validation view collection level observed factors. So what I will do is go into Gatorville, right click on my June 2021 base scenario, go to validation and go to view collection level of validation factors. And Brian, I will hang out here a second until you're all the way caught up. The gist of this is that what TBEST does is it will produce this adjustment factor. And if the adjustment factor is below 1, it means that TBEST has over predicted relative to the observed ridership, and that it has to adjust based on the factor here. So it will multiply the ridership times, in the case of Route 1, times 0.41 to reduce it back down to what was the observed. And likewise on down the line here. But what I'm seeing here is actually pretty good in terms of the factors are very consistent, so you see a lot of 0.3, 0.36, 0.35, et cetera, which means that it's consistently over predicted. So that is what you want, is consistency in the model. And that's what's being produced here for the most part. So what I would say is that, if it were over predicted, or I'm sorry, under predicted, then it would be a 1.5 factor or something like that. So it's adjusting it upwards as a multiplier. All right, excellent. Brian, were you able to see this? And Susan?
Yep, I'm good.
I'm at the same place as you. Yeah.
Okay, so this is just a reference, okay? So you can't change these in here because that would, again, affect the integrity of the model. So this is just a lookup so that you can see how the model did in terms of fitting to the observed to the estimated.